Hi, everybody. Okay, great. Today things went relatively flawlessly, so that was nice. Turns out that I'm going to be calling off the volunteer pool for the ZIT that I was forming the other. Oh, it's on this side. Yep, there it is. That I was forming. It's slowed down. It's not a mountain range anymore. So if anybody was interested in volunteering to scale that mountain, sorry, I'm going to have to go ahead and close that volunteer poll. So, okay, let's see. It's 5:29. I think I'm doing pretty consistently with running at the last minute. So that's awesome. Let's see what happened today. A lot of things. I didn't do my meditation, so I am a little bit, a little out of sorts today, I'll be honest, but feeling pretty good, all things considered. I'm really, really excited about the relaunch of Gilded Fae on December 29th. So that's awesome. Just a quick housekeeping thing before we get into the reading. I will be reading on Monday, today, the 7th of December. Tomorrow, Tuesday, I know it's a little different. And then, of course, on Wednesday. The reason I'm going to be reading on Tuesday instead of Friday is because I have some Christmas-related things, birthday and Christmas-related things to do. So that's going to be happening on Friday instead of the live reading. However, I know a lot of you, in fact, most of you are catching up after the fact. So I'm perfectly fine with that. I just want this to get out there so everybody has a chance to stay on top of the readings, because I know that when I'm into a story, when it goes away or isn't consistent, I get pretty agitated. So I don't want to agitate any of you. So I just thought I'd go ahead and pass along the expectations so you know what to look forward to. And we're going to go ahead and get right into the reading here. Just as a recap from last time, they did the autopsy of Patty, found out she was a fairy and carrying a vampire baby. So then she went to her uncle's house, found out that he was a vampire, and by extension, Sven is a vampire. So that has significantly compromised and complicated things. So here we go, chapter 19. I raised my head out of the water. Bubbles and water streamed down my face. It had been a week since I'd seen Sven. A week to ponder the unfairness of life. Why did I have to fall in love with a vampire? With a sigh, I sank back into the water. I stopped just before my nose went under the surface. The water lapped at my face and moved my hair. Not for the first time, grateful for the garden tub in my apartment, I let out a sigh. The water cocooned me. It was no surprise when the thought of Sven came again. This time, I let it. There had been no more calls, no more knocks. At the good times, I'd been numb. At the bad, I covered my face. The whole thing was stupid. I brought my face back out of the water and turned over onto my stomach. A candle flickered from its perch on the sink. The flame danced and moved against the smooth porcelain. This nonsense wasn't worth thinking about. No sense in wallowing in the pain. I just had to find a way to move past it. It wasn't like I'd known him all that long. But did you need to know someone forever to know that you belonged together? His wit, his humor, his quiet understanding, his steady presence and support, acceptance, his kisses, his touch. It was everything I ever wanted. Sweet Danu, did that have to come in the package of a vampire? I saw a blue light jump in the bedroom with an audible crack. I bit the inside of my cheek. This couldn't be any good. Anthony's penis walked into view. Oh, I'm sorry. Anthony walked into view. It was just hard to notice anything else since he was completely naked. His face was not kind as he said, "Get out of the tub." "Go away, Anthony," I said, very conscious of the fact that I was also naked. I argued with myself as to whether it was worse for him to see my ass or my front. "I'm not playing, Cy," as if I needed him to tell me. The set of his body made that as evident as the package between his thighs. "Good. I'm not much in the mood for games," I said, more to myself than to him, as I decided I didn't care and flipped over. The bubbles covered my chest. I instantly felt better about my decision. When I wrapped my arms around my chest to cradle my shoulders, I felt even better. I closed my eyes, letting the soothing feeling wash over me. "We have to talk," he said. It interrupted my peace. I opened my eyes and stared off into the distance. Finally, I'd made myself focus on him. I uncrossed my arms and made a little O with my fingers as I picked my hand out of the bubbles. I brought it up to block my view of him. With little movements, I opened it a little wider. The bubbles separated, making a sudsy border around his face. Better. So talk, I said. Get out of the tub. A purple vein pulsed in his forehead as he said it. He seemed angry. When I didn't seem appropriately impressed with his anger, he added, or I will come in and get you. The remaining bubbles disintegrated between my fingers, and I dropped my hand back into the water. I switched it around in the now lukewarm water. So dramatic. A narrowing of his eyes was the only indicator I got of his actions before he was at the tub, scooping me out of the water. Water cascaded from my body in rivulets as he hoisted me into the air. The streams flew through the air and struck the wall with a splat splat as he swung me around. Despite his rough actions, he cradled me against his smooth chest. Bubbles clung to my skin and slid off in chunks as he started to walk. It was hard to ignore his naked body rubbing against mine with every step. When we reached the bed, he unceremoniously deposited me onto it. The air left in a whoosh as I sank into the pillow top. I didn't like this position any better. It put me eye level with his shaft. It nodded to me as he backed up to look me in the eye. I covered my face and shook my head to make the image go away. As worked up as I was from thinking about Sven all the time, I so did not need this right now. Bad decisions happened at times like these. I cocooned myself in the down comforter and slumped forward. Spit it out already, I said, and then added more because I was upset than anything. And for Dagda's sake, put some damn clothes on. Since when do you care about modesty? Bitterness was clear in his voice. Since I thought you came here to have a conversation and not get me into bed, I challenged. A look flashed over his face that said he would like to get me in bed, but it was gone again before I could give the thought any weight. To my relief, he was kind enough to oblige my request. Flicking his wrist, he turned his fingers towards the ceiling. Then he pinched them together and reached in. That was the best way I could describe it when he pulled things out of the spaces between worlds. He literally looked like he was reaching into an invisible bag. He pulled out an identical white loincloth to the one he had on the other day. When I'd questioned him about his fashion choice before, he said the fabric got expensive to replace. I could understand that. Space wasn't meant to be bent in an instant. There were repercussions when you did. Well, when he did anyway. I didn't know any other fairy that could operate the spaces between. After he put on the cloth, he held his hands to the side. Better? Blue glittered off his chest from the candlelight that danced in from the bathroom. I dropped my eyes. I had no business admiring him. I wasn't in the mood to window shop, and I certainly wasn't about to buy that merchandise. Oh, sure, I said, heavy sarcasm in my voice. He didn't bother to respond. I was transfixed on his thighs as he paced back and forth, his loincloth rising and falling with his steps. Finally, he turned to me and said and what he said dropped my stomach. Vampire Cy? Really? Chapter 20. I stopped staring at his thighs and narrowed my eyes at him. There is no way he could know about that. No other fairies knew about that. Well, unless you count the Carmichaels, and they had a vested interest in not outing me. He pressed forward, continuing on his path to wearing out my carpet. Do you really want to take us on a fast track to extinction? Has our past taught you nothing? How do you know about that? I asked, aware that my voice had become dead calm. My tone dropped as a thought came to me. You're using pixies to spy again, aren't you? Since when did you mend that fence? Murdering a king and a princess isn't so easy to overlook, I'd think. I didn't bother to mention that the king and princess in question had been my dead father and my perfect sister. He already knew that, just as well as he knew the guilt I carried around because of their deaths. He also knew how my inadequacies slapped me in the face at every turn, highlighted by their absence from my life. Anthony stopped his pacing and closed distance between us. His eyes flashed inches from mine. How we know is not important. Such actions are inexcusable. Are you looking to make your self-imposed exile a permanent one? We? I sat back onto my shins, deflated. It never occurred to me that he could be an official messenger business. I prayed that wasn't true. That wasn't a can of worms I needed to open. My hands became hot and I wiped them on the comforter. Are you here for the court? I didn't want to ask, but I had to. His eyes sparked and anger burned in them. I should be, was all he said. I tried again. My mother? The only response to that was his lips thinning into a line. That took me aback. I let the air out from my lungs in a deep exhale. He was making a big sacrifice by coming here without their knowledge. His sacrifice alone should have been big enough, but I couldn't leave it alone. Why didn't you go to the court? I asked. He shifted on his feet. It doesn't matter. Oh, it mattered. I didn't want to give him false hope that something could happen between him and I. I should kill that thought right now. He would just deny it if I said anything, though. So instead I said, with a bravado I was far from feeling, leave me alone, Anthony. I know what I'm doing. It sounded pretty convincing, even to me. You don't. They're going to eat you alive. Literally. He grabbed my shoulders. My teeth clicked together as he gave me a shake. Holy Dano, are you on a suicide mission? I bit the inside of my cheek. Thickness stuck in my throat. I wanted to say something to reassure him, but how could I reassure him when I didn't even know what was going on? My brow wrinkled as I worked to say something that would help. From the way emotions rolled across Anthony's face, I could tell he struggled with my obvious indecisiveness. But what could I do? The bed dipped as he knelt onto it, matching my position. His huge wings curved, blocking out everything else but him. His hands caressed my cheek as he moved a strand of my wet hair out of my face. Come back with me. He wasn't just talking for a day, as friends. He was talking about for good, as a love. No, 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 no. I pressed my lips together to keep them from trembling. Why did this have to be happening now? He wanted to make my childhood dreams come true? I should want this more. So why then did I feel the bottom of my world was falling out? Cy, you struggled too long. Let me take care of you. All of my forgotten dreams, here they were, on the cusp of being a reality. But I didn't want them anymore. I started to shake with the awfulness of it. Why couldn't I just say yes? Why couldn't I want what I should? His hand cupped my cheek and his thumb caressed the fullness of my lip. You know we're meant to be together. I wanted to feel something, love, tenderness, even lust. But I felt nothing. I laid my hand on my chest. Why? For the love of God's why? I squeezed my eyes shut tight. After a minute, I realized my head was shaking over and over. Cy, no, I cried as I wrenched away from him. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be strong. I've been strong for too long. I dropped on the bed in a heap. The down comforter ballooned around me. Cy, no, 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 no. I couldn't stop saying it. I rocked back and forth to make it go away, to make it all go away. I couldn't take it anymore. It was too much, all of it, too much. Wetness streaked down my face. Belatedly, I realized I was crying. The bed lifted ever so slightly as Anthony's weight lifted off of it. Even with his absence, I couldn't seem to stop the tears. I dropped my face under the bed and pushed my face into the softness. I had to make them stop. Get it together. My breath came back hot against my cheeks as my tears pooled wet beneath my face. I could feel Anthony's presence over me again. My hand clutched the other. Please just go away, I thought. After a minute, I heard his feet swish through the carpet as he walked into the living room. Only then did the deep breath I'd been searching for come. A few breaths later, and I realized the tears had stopped. Sweet Dana, thank you. Moments later, the unmistakable click of a bolt traveled to me. I sat up straight in bed. I clutched my throat as the telltale creak of the front door followed on its heels. What was he doing? It was the middle of the day. I could think of 2 spectacular reasons he couldn't go outside. I abandoned the covers and crawled to the edge of the bed, ready to leap from it. To my complete confusion, I heard more swishing of carpet. He was coming back? It wasn't Anthony, though. It was Gage, and she was racing through the door like the hounds of hell were on her heels. Chapter 21. All I could do was stare at her, dumbstruck. She stopped short and did the same thing while looking at me. I'm sure it was no little surprise that I was as naked as the day I was born. When it registered that I'd been crying, she ran the last few steps to me in her black kitten heels. Oh my God, Cy, are you okay? That's up for debate, I croaked in response. You didn't see anyone, did you? I asked as I stepped out of bed, dragging the covers behind me. Who would I see? Gage asked. I could hear the excitement in her voice that she might have caught me in the middle of something naughty. It was too bad I had to disappoint her. My chin trembled. Yeah, too bad. The answer to where in the world was Anthony made itself evident by a huge circle of sift in front of the door. He'd let Gage in and left. Thank the gods. I didn't want to think of what could have happened should there be a particular vampire outside my door, if Anthony was stupid enough to go waltzing out there. Have you been holding here for the last week getting ready for a craft fair or something? Gage asked from over my shoulder as she spotted the mess of glitter. I wish. How I wish that were true with all of my being. The truth was so much harder. So what's going on? You've been avoiding my calls all week, and I come here to find you playing Lady Godiva amid a crafter's dream? She asked as I made my way back to the bedroom. I pulled on some underwear and a bra. They didn't match, but I didn't care. I grabbed some jeans and stopped, leg deep. You remember the hottie at the bar? Gage got very still. I'll kill him. No, it's not like that. I pulled my pants on the rest of the way and buttoned them. How did I explain the problem without explaining what was going on? I loved Gage, but I couldn't take that chance. Well, maybe not entirely. I walked to the closet and made a show of flipping through the shirts while I thought. I couldn't tell her I was a fairy because I couldn't risk that getting out. I knew some of my loneliness stemmed from being away from my kind. All it would take was for her to get it into her head that I should be with them for my own good, and there'd be no stopping her from trying to find out where they lived. One word to the wrong person, and bam, vampires would know we existed again, and I couldn't chance that. But maybe I could talk to her about my dilemma with Sven. I couldn't seem to move past him on my own. The last few days had shown me that as clear as the crystal columns on the Bardet. If there was any time I could really use her help, it was now. I pulled a shirt at random and turned back to her. What if I told you there were things in this world you couldn't explain? She snorted and said, I live in New York City. I've seen my share of the unpredictable and unexplainable. No, I mean stuff that you thought was fantasy. Like what? She sat on the bed, cautious but open. I appreciated that. I sat on the bed next to her, my shirt a ball in my lap. Like vampires, for example. At first, her face was a mixture of confusion, then clarity. Anger and fear chased themselves over her face, leaving a dawning horror. Holy hell, he bit you. Her fingers were surprisingly strong as she grasped my head and turned it from side to side. I couldn't help but laugh as she pulled my torso down and flipped my hair forward. He didn't bite me. Her long fingers released me. I sat up, still giggling. It felt good. I hadn't giggled in days. But he's a vampire, she confirmed. So it would seem, I said, not wanting to say it out loud. That's, wow. She chewed her lip and settled on. Not what I would have guessed. Yeah, me either, I said, digging my fingers into the shirt in my hands as the shadow of sadness threatened to creep back over me. She put a hand on my knee, bringing me back. Why don't you tell me what happened? Relief overwhelmed me for a second. I, honest to God, had someone to talk to. I couldn't believe this was actually happening. True, I couldn't tell her about being a fairy, but this was more than I could have ever hoped for. I told her everything, leaving out Anthony and the parts about my being a fairy, of course. She gasped, looked horrified, and laughed in all the right places. By the end of it, I was feeling almost back to my old self. I finished my story with, after he kissed me, he said, when I'm ready to be happy, to come and find him. I was proud of how almost matter-of-fact it came out. She opened and closed her mouth a couple of times and sat quiet for a minute. But he didn't bite you? It was obvious she was picking her words carefully. At my head shake, she said, and nobody actually hurt you? Well, no, not yet, I conceded. At her face, I added, but he's a vampire. And he could kill me. I added, dumbfounded that she didn't get why this was so monumental. I could kill you. Are you going to stop hanging around with me too? But you don't thirst for my blood. I felt dumb saying the words, but it was the truth. I get hungry. You don't see me chopping you up and making a nice steak out of you when I'm hungry, do you? I didn't want to admit she had a point, but she did. If he wasn't a vampire, do you think you two would be happy together? I thought of the laughs we'd shared and the heat. Well, yeah. Do you know what I think? She said after a minute. I didn't, but she went on anyway. I think you're scared. That was an understatement. She took my forgotten shirt and tossed it onto the bed. With strong arms, she pulled me in for a hug. The smell of coconut filled my senses as I rested my cheek on the comfort of her hair. Are you going to let fear rule your life? The sound of her voice hummed against my ear. When she put it that way, it was hard to argue with. After a second, I gave a quick shake of my head. She pulled away and held me at arm's length. Then, Cy, what are you doing? A guy like that doesn't come along every day. Trust me, I would know. At my quiet speculation, she punched my arm. Go get him. My stomach flipped as fear and hope warred inside me. She didn't know what she was asking. It wasn't so easy to put aside thousands of years of hatred. Then again, what happened hundreds of years ago didn't exactly look like what I'd seen this past week. Maybe vampires had changed with the times. They certainly seemed like it. Like it. No matter how you diced it, the reality was I'd never met anyone like Sven. I'd been alive long enough to wonder if I ever would again. I got a mental picture of me sitting in a rocking chair, old and alone, while everyone else had their life mates and happy families. Was I really going to let my chance at happiness get away? Prejudices be damned, I sat up a little straighter. No way. Okay, I'll do it. A huge grin lit up her face. That's my girl. So how do we find him? I searched back to last week's events. It took me a second, but I finally remembered. He goes to a club called MV. Then that's where we're going. It's Saturday, so there's no time like the present. Trepidation trickled down my spine, but I nodded. I can do this. She slapped my shoulder. Okay, let's do it. That's when the we in her words hit me. Pinching the bridge of her nose, I considered it. What would it be like if she came? A disaster, that's what it would be like. I dropped my arms. She couldn't come with me. But it was sweet as hell for her to be there for me like that. I pulled her in for a long hug. Her warmth made me feel invincible. By the time we pulled away, I was smiling. She was right. I could do this. With a lift of my chin, I said, you stay here. I am a bounty hunter. I've got this. Her face studied mine. For once, there was no smile in her eyes as she studied the determination in the set of my shoulders. After a minute, she just nodded. Well, then let's get you suited up to do battle and get your man. What do you have that says, I'll kill you if you lay one finger on me and your name is not Sven? Thanks, Candy. We're going on to chapter 22. It's going to get good. Chapter 22. There was a smart way to do this, and there was a dumb way to do this. I stopped to shift the stake beneath my leather arm warmers. It was made out of bone, like it should be, so it was cool against my skin. I resumed my pace before I lost my nerve. I surveyed the dark building front as I came upon it. It was blank-looking and weathered. For that matter, nothing showed any indication this was the right place at all. No bump, no beep, not even a front sign. I'd gotten the address from a not-so-thrilled worm at the saw. I figured if anyone knew where this place was, it would be them. I was right. They even had intel on it. Turns out the MV stood for Madame Violet. The name alone creeped me out. Every fiber of my being stood on end when Worm's graveled voice said it. I'm sure it had some significance, but I didn't ask what it meant. As I stalked up to the entrance, a slight shift in my spine reminded me of the long knife tucked inside my corset. I knew I looked like a vampire's wet dream with all the leather, but it hadn't been intentional. I had to wear the underbust halter to keep the knife from poking me. If things got out of hand, I wanted to be able to grab the blade faster than Kris Kringle's reindeer. I'd even thrown on a lace shirt under the corset, so there wasn't a problem with the coldness of the blade. The shirt was a smart choice, too. It had capped sleeves for maneuverability. I was quite happy with the outfit Gage and I had chosen. Last-minute planning didn't have to be stupid planning. I shrugged off the sensation of the knife. It really just made my stride more rigid than it otherwise would have been. But then again, that might have been the leather garters attached to the corset. I didn't like having things strapped to my thighs, but I wore them whenever I felt like I needed extra protection. And tonight fell into that category. Usually I reserved them for my extra firepower. At the moment, they secured flasks to my thighs. The flasks weren't for liquid courage. They were for the holy water I'd swiped from St. Patrick's Cathedral on the way over. That just left one more thing. With a thought, I pulled some Kundalini energy to throw a layer of glamour over me. And just like that, my eyes became an unremarkable mildew color, my skin turned ashen, and my nails yellowed. I could let the energy go if I saw Sven. As it was, I didn't want to draw attention. It was now or never. I was proud of myself as I wrapped my hand around the thick metal handle without hesitation and pulled. I put my back into opening it. It was heavier than it looked. A shiver of foreboding trickled to my toes. A wall of music slammed into me as I opened the door. I brought up my arm to shield my eyes as the light blinded me for a split second. My right hand dropped to the flask at my thigh. I fingered the flip-top lid until my eyes adjusted. When they did, I stepped into a large foyer. Rough-hewn wood floors ran into bright violet walls. A lone coffin leaned against the north wall. Only the side could be seen from where I stood, but it was enough to freak me out. Years of panic crawled up my throat as I counted backwards from 10 until the urge to turn around and walk away subsided. On the wall in front of me, complimentary neon ran up the doorway to scrawl Madame Violet in bold letters across the arch before it came back down to the other side. I framed the door in a way that made the dance floor beyond look like a living painting. The darkness pulsated. Get in, get Sven, and get out. I squared my shoulders and started across the floor. Almost immediately, a figure stepped out of the coffin. She was beautiful. Skin-tight black bodice covered in blood-red crystals spanned her torso. The crystals fell in lines from her décolleté down to end in trails at her waist. The pattern emphasized her already tiny waist. She wore a matching bolero collar that laced up her neck and extended far enough off the caps of her shoulders, like a rigid mini caplet. With the wide fishnets, silk hot pants, and thigh-high boots, I felt seriously underdressed. She glided to me with her pelvis leading the way. The leather of my corset creaked as I brought my arms up. I crossed them like I had an attitude and slipped a hand under the arm warmer to grab a hold of the stake. I steadied my mind. If this was just like I'd planned, I wasn't going down without a fight. I'd really hoped I could get out of here without one, though. The heels of her boots on the wood floor didn't make a sound until she was a foot in front of me. At her proximity, the music faded as if it were piped in. The small taps of her heels could only be heard then. Interesting. Only when she was close enough that I had to narrow my focus did she stop. Her fangs grew as she took in my leather boots and followed the trail up my tight pants. She took her dear sweet time getting to my face. Lost, darling? Her words were thick with the fangs in her mouth. No. I made an effort not to swallow the words that stuck in my throat when her head turned in a very non-human way. Somehow I was able to finish the thought. I'm looking for a man named Sven. I expected a lot of things, but a wide smile was not one of them. Her fangs rested on her red lips as her face stretched into a smile. She did a half bow and swept a hand to the swirling lights of the club beyond her domain. I pushed the stake back into its place and uncrossed my arms. With a look that I hoped showed I wasn't scared, I moved past her. My steps faltered, but I kept walking as I heard her say behind me, "If you don't come out alive, don't say I didn't warn you." My palms started to sweat as I walked past her. I kept my hands over the flask the entire time. If she pounced, I'd be ready. It wasn't until a few paces past her that the music came back in, full force. I guess it wasn't just Sven that affected me when the world seemed to calm down around him. Maybe this is what they meant when they said the world died around vampires. When I crossed the threshold into the club, my feet slowed to a stop. I couldn't help myself. I was paralyzed by fear. I'd never been around this many vampires in my life. Vampires on the dance floor jumped in waves like an angry snake. The bass of the music pounded like a slow heartbeat. I felt it bleed into my chest and take over the beat of my own heartbeat, slowing it to an almost comatose state. I wanted to close my eyes and fall to the floor. It took energy to keep my eyes open and look around the room. Chandeliers with candles suspended on delicate chains dropped from the high ceilings. Deep purple laser lights bounced and ricocheted off the chandeliers, the walls, and the crowd, all in time to the music. Bat sconces clung to the walls. Their wings encircled the light and lit the room in electric violet. The biggest piece in the room was a beast of a bar that filled the entire far wall. Giant godlike columns anchored it to the floor. Besides a few chairs, the huge sunken room was bare. If you didn't count the vampires almost stacked on top of each other, that is. It looked tame enough as far as clubs went. No sign of Sven, though. Come on, Sven, I thought. Almost seconds after the thought entered my head, I saw him in the back. The cords of his neck and his dark hair flashed in the strobe light. Recognition awakened me from my trance, and I started down the steps. 3 steps down, I looked back up, and he was gone. Hell's breath. Where did he go? Despite losing track of him, I kept moving. I knew approximately where he was, and that was more than I could say since stepping into this real world horror show. To minimize my chances of running into any more vampires, I crept along the edges of the room. I was shocked to discover there were more than just vampires here. The only reason I could say that with absolute confidence was because the music kept alternating between muted and blaring when I walked past the crowd. By the time I was almost at the back, I was working on quite a headache. The only thing it did for me was pretty much cement what it meant when someone said the world stopped around vampires. Beyond that, they all seemed pretty normal. My feet hit a solid mass. I'd been so distracted by the crowd, I didn't think to look down. I did now. Underneath a poster of a woman with "Care for a Bite," scrawled across her midsection, sat a vampire. Sat was a generous term, really. He leaned against the wall, but at an odd angle. He looked like he was on one deep breath away from falling over. A goblet was in his unsteady hand. From the thick red that coated the glass, it was obvious that blood had been in it. He skimmed his finger along the inside of the cup, scooping out the remnants from the glass. With a trace amount of blood clung to his shaky finger, he put it into his mouth. His eyes closed in blissful relief as he pulled his long finger out, twisting it along the way. To my amazement, his eyelashes crusted over with ice, followed by his hair. Then his face turned blue as if it had frostbite. Seconds passed and then it melted, leaving a sheen on his face. After a second's pause, eagerness animated his eyes again, and he dipped his fingers back into the glass. What in the hell? All I could do was stare in fascination as he did that over and over again. After a minute, I heard a smooth voice say behind me, "Heaven's tears." My hand was reaching for the knife in my corset before the words were out of his mouth. I whipped around, my hand at the ready. I didn't want to freak out a room full of vampires, but I wasn't going to sit here and let one take me out either. A black-haired vampire stood there in all white. He had his shoulder against the wall. The way he stood made me want to push him down. He was too cocky. He felt taller than me, but logic told me we were the same height. His stance said he was harmless. Harmless, but he had that creep vibe down to a science. Creepy didn't warrant a knife, though. Not yet, anyway. I stretched in a big way to seem like I had a reason for my arm being behind me. After my exaggerated stretch, I dropped my arm. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, as I dropped my arm to the flask at my thigh. I hooked my thumb over it in what I hoped seemed like a natural resting position. Even if he was harmless, since he was a vampire, that still meant being ready for anything. "What he's on," the vampire explained when he saw my blank look. He raised an eyebrow at my silence. "You were curious, weren't you?" Dumbfounded was more like it, but I wasn't about to say that to him. I said instead, "I thought it was blood." He threw his head back and laughed a rich laugh. I felt very much like he was laughing at me. When he said, "How sweet," I knew he was. I scowled and turned to go. "Hey, pretty, don't get so bent," he called after me. I barely heard him as I stepped over the strung-out vampire still on the floor and kept going. I should know better than talk to guys in clubs, vampires or not. As I made my way farther into the club, I tried to stay away from the bar. I didn't want anyone to get any bright ideas that I was cheaper than a drink they had to buy. The best I could do was skirt the corner of it. It was mammoth, so that's what I did. Part of me, you know that insane part everyone has, thought if I held my breath, I'd seem less alive, less like a designer shoe to someone with a foot fetish. It was a ridiculous thought, I know, but I did it anyway. I sucked in a huge breath and held it as I approached the ornate columns the huge bar curled around. The scrolls in these massive columns, which shot all the way up to the 20-foot ceilings, were so deep I couldn't help but think a pixie would love to slide down them. A pity it was wasted on us regular-sized people. I tried to pass by and seem nonchalant, but my damn curiosity got the best of me and I snuck a glance at the bar. Bottles of all shapes and styles were lined against the mirrored bar. The difference was all of them contained what appeared to be the same dark red liquid. I did see a fat-bottomed bottle with blue liquid in it. It said octopus. I wondered if it was real or if they named their drinks like humans did. A vampire manned the bar. She wore the same hot pants and fishnets of the woman upstairs. The difference was she had on a t-shirt that had a large mouth on it. The mouth had been drawn as a sexy Cupid bow mouth and opened wide enough to see a hint of fangs. Apparently, sex didn't just sell with humans. It was kind of anticlimactic. If you didn't think about it being blood and vampires, it just looked like a regular bar. Until I rounded the corner, that is. The breath I'd been holding came out in a ragged exhale. Behind the giant column where the curl of the bar ended, a man lay sprawled out in the bar. His arms were askew and he had one leg bent, resting on the bar, and the other dangling off the edge. It was his face that really got me, though. His eyes sunk in his pallid complexion, but a smile of pure bliss lay like an echo on his face. A wide sheet of blood covered his neck and ended in a trail of droplets in the glossy bar top. It was hard to remember to keep moving until I saw the petite vampire next to him. She had a delicate hand fanned out across his bare torso. Her eyes followed me. They were the most bizarre eyes I'd ever seen. The whites were dark red and the pupils were so blue, so bright, they almost looked white. The man had clearly been a donor to the vampire with the silk hair because blood was smeared across her delicate lips and dripped down her chin. Even as I stared at her, the blood fell like an afterthought onto her knotted Misfits t-shirt. I kept moving, my feet doing most of the work for my brain. Vampires were just like everyone else, I reminded myself as I came upon the area I'd seen Sven in. If possible, this place seemed darker than the rest of the club. The words "Blood Garden" were graffitied onto a beam that lowered the ceiling to a more intimate height. On the outside, I kept calm, but panic ran through me like a horde of crazy people. My thoughts chased the crazy in all directions. The only thought I could hold on to was that I really didn't want something called the Blood Garden to feel intimate. I wanted it to be a nice art room. That thought and one more rooted in the chaos. I so did not want to go in there. A section of picket fence hung from the wall closest to me. Below it said, "Break off in case of sparkly vampires." I think I'd seen that on Etsy before, but it struck me funnier here. I giggled. The sun was swallowed up by the dark. Despite fear immobilizing the blood in my veins, I kept moving. I didn't have a choice. Not unless I wanted to give the vampire at the bar a chance to get up close and personal with me, too. Feeling a lot like a lamb going into the slaughter, the darkness swallowed me as I stepped into the shadows. As soon as I stepped in, I realized there were pinpricks of light above me. The points provided zero illumination, but that might have made it even more breathtaking in the inky darkness. The artist who'd put it together had an incredible talent. The night sky glittered above, complete with shooting stars. I wanted to take the time to drink in its beauty, but I had to find Sven and get out of here. I'd been lucky up until now, plain and simple. I needed to get out of here before that luck ran out. Since I couldn't see a stitch, I bent over and reached my hands out in front of me. With careful fingers, I searched the dark. Inch by inch, I moved forward until my fingers connected with something. My first reaction that came over me was terror. My heart raced and the world careened. It left me dizzy and breathless. It took me a few full 5 seconds and some Olympic-style breathing before I realized I'd touched a couch. I rested my head on the velvet cushion. Get a grip, Cy. If I had any chance of getting out of this, I had to calm down. In all honesty, I hadn't seen anything yet that justified the trepidation churning in my gut. Even the guy in the bar looked willing, as bizarre as that seemed. Come to think of it, he was very much alive. If she'd wanted him dead, she could have drained him without a second thought. Maybe, and this was a big maybe, I was overreacting a bit. Okay, considering I was currently bent over a couch and then in the dark having a mini panic attack, maybe a lot. I had to shake it off and find Sven. Besides, if I was going to try to make it work between him and I would have to get used to this kind of thing. Like yesterday. Pushing myself to my feet, I looked around the room again. The tension in my back eased a bit when I could make out shapes. I let my eyes adjust even more, and before long, I could make out the entire room. The room spanned about 15 by 15 feet. Couches curved, one into the other, around the perimeter of the room, and a large coffin sat in the center. A crystal skull vase glittered softly in the center of it. Flowers flowed out of the vase and trailed onto the runner underneath. To my embarrassment, I saw couples laid out on the couches. They probably thought I was insane. Actually, upon closer inspection, maybe not. They all seemed to be very much in their own worlds. One woman sat atop of a man, her movements leaving little to the imagination as to what they were doing. Another couple was all limbs, intertwined on the couch with matching expressions of contentment on their bloodied lips. I brushed off my ego and looked around. Okay, he wasn't here. Now what? Go back out to the club and try to look for him some more? Just how long could I walk around this place and not expect trouble? As I stood there, indecision indecision rifling through me, the vampire from earlier sauntered up. His teeth shone white as his lips parted into a smile. I was really starting to not like his face. And just what are you doing in here, pretty? He took a finger and trailed it over my collarbone. You don't look like a fangbanger. Get bent, I said as I pushed his hand off me with more bravado that I was feeling. He didn't need to know my insides were quaking. He continued on as if I hadn't said anything and circled around me in a slow walk. Or are you looking for someone? Maybe I can help. The words flowed off his tongue like they were slick with oil. I believed he could help me, like I believed pixies were going to fly out of my butt. I didn't like his too intense interest. I blurted out, I'm with someone. His eyebrow twitched and he suppressed a smile as if that were all kinds of hilarious. Is that so? Yeah, so leave me alone. With that, I turned on my heel and walked away. Nothing good was going to come of talking with this creep. This conversation was over. Or it was until he said, so you're not looking for, oh, I don't know, Sven? I stopped in my tracks. Ice trickled down my spine. Did he know Sven? He had to. How did he know I was here for him? He must have spoken to the hostess. My pulse thrummed on my tongue. Why would he talk to her about me? It depends, I said, choosing my word carefully. Do you know where he is? Of course I do. I know everything, he said in a self-satisfied voice as he waited for me to react. When he didn't, he added, I'm Thomas. What did you say when a vampire introduced themselves to you? I settled for an awkward nod. When it was clear I didn't have anything else to say, Thomas inclined his head towards the door. He just left, he said in a voice with a raise of an eyebrow. It was too convenient. I don't believe you. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips and his eyes rolled to the side as he shrugged. There was a 50-50 chance he was lying through his smashable teeth. I couldn't ignore the fact that Sven didn't seem to be here, though. I hadn't seen him anywhere since that one time in the club when he was in the back. No matters. Thomas couldn't help me with anything. No, not bothering with a response, I turned back to the club. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked away. They squeezed me like a python. Relief grew in my lungs as I joined the dancers in the light again. Never in a million lifetimes would I have believed a vampire could bring me relief, let alone a whole room of them. But then again, I would have given almost anything to be away from Thomas. I shook myself out of my false sense of security. Despite how I was feeling at the moment, I was still standing in a room full of vampires. It felt a lot like being a juicy steak among a crowd of homeless people. Whether I believed Thomas or not, I had to get out of here before I grabbed even more unwanted attention. Sooner or later, someone wasn't going to be able to keep their hands or their teeth to themselves. Caught in indecision, I spied the foyer where I'd come in. The bright room beckoned to me. That was probably the best and safest place to do a double check for Sven. Making my way around the dance floor was quicker this time. In no time, I was back on the landing. This time, I made no pretense. I craned my neck and searched the whole room. After a minute, it seemed like Thomas had actually told the truth. Sven, or so it seemed, was gone. It was time to make myself scarce too. I'd had enough for one night. As I turned to leave, white caught my eye. I paused. Thomas stood in the middle of the sea of black, a beacon of hate. It radiated off him. I wasn't sure what I did to deserve that level of hate, but there was no way I was sticking around to find out. Grateful for the distance that separated us, I walked through the unnaturally bright foyer. I slipped my hand into my glove again as I kept my eye on the hostess. She rested in the upright coffin, her delicate wrists crossed over each other on her chest. I didn't trust the peaceful set of her closed eyes, but to my surprise, that's where she stayed, even as the door sucked the fresh air from the street in as I opened it and then closed it again. Like an idiot, I stood there. The sounds of the city floated around me in the night. It was dark as New York City could get, which was to say there was a whisper of darkness and not much more. The cool wind blew across my bare arms as a realization that I made it out alive grew on me. I giggled and then full out laughed. I did it. Hot damn, I actually did it. Feeling lighter than I had in a week, I released the glamour and flipped my phone open to send a text to the cab. With that finished, I slipped into my pocket and headed across the street. I'd grab a drink from the drugstore across the street while I waited. I was halfway across the street when two guys materialized from the shadows. My gut dropped to my toes. Please, no. Their shoes made no sound on the uneven pavement as they moved towards me. They came close. It became obvious these weren't ordinary guys. They were vampires. They didn't just look like your typical vampires. Then again, after what I'd seen in the club, I was starting to question my ideas of what a typical vampire looked like. One of these guys was short, had a golf hat, and a decidedly New York smirk on his face. The other was lanky and walked with his shoulders leading the way as he spun a knife between his shoulders, or between his knuckles. That would be awkward. I assumed the knife was for show, but I didn't want to stick around to find out. Leaving so soon? Asked the one with the golf hat. So sad. Don't do that, said the other, tisking with a mock serious look on his face. Stay and play. Over my dead body. Then again, that was probably the idea. I had to get out of here, or it would be just that. I'd go back in the club. As crazy as it sounded, they hadn't attacked me there. I didn't know why they hadn't, but I wasn't about to stay and ask why not. I did an about-face just as the door of the club swung open. White shoes appeared under the door. Fear shot through me in a wide arc. It stopped me in my tracks and squeezed the air from my lungs. This was not happening. I made the decision right then and there. I wasn't going down without a fight. I switched to autopilot as I reached in my glove with my right hand and pulled out the bone stake. Then with my left hand, I dropped my other hand down and slipped out the flask and flipped the cover off it. Thomas came around the door and let it shut behind him. The street had come alive with the sounds of the club, but now it seemed empty. It had been left behind, a dry, lifeless death, not filled with sorrow, but bitter and empty. Poor Pretty. You didn't really think you were just going to walk out like that, did you? Thomas asked as he stepped off the curb towards me. His advancement propelled me into action. I imagined my shoving the stake in his chest and swung it a couple of times to memorize the movement as I stepped forward. Cold fear ran through me as rough hands grabbed my arm from behind me and pulled me back. I palmed the stake and brought my arm up to roll him. Another set of hands grabbed my other arm. The skate skittered down the street with little pings. Danu saved me. This couldn't be happening. With frantic movements, I kicked at the legs behind me. A curse in my ear was the most I got from my actions. Thomas shook his head. A smile crept onto his face. His black spiked hair bounced with the movement. Then the smile was gone, and his eyes grew wide with astonishment. I had a split second to wonder what made him react like that before I heard a clunk behind my ear. Then hands released me. I turned in time to see the vampires fall to the pavement, revealing Anthony's life frame. His wings were stretched, wide like flags of justice. Relief swept over me. It was so palpable, tears sprung to my eyes. I turned to see Thomas sprinting toward us, his eyes flashed and his fangs extended. We were so dead. Anthony, I screamed, all the fear of the night coming out in that one plea. Anthony jerked me. I fell against the heat of him. His velvet wings enveloped me, blocking my view from the vampire that raged mere feet away. I didn't think Anthony had ever taken anyone with him through spaces between before. I prayed with all my heart it would work, and we wouldn't end up on the other side a bloodied mess, or worse yet, stuck forever in the spaces between. I didn't think now was the time to bring it up, so I gritted my teeth against the wind that whirred and rebounded inside the cocoon of Anthony's midnight blue wings. My heart stopped when the most terrifying shout I'd ever heard roared over it all. Goosebumps ran up and down my body. Too long. It was taking too long. Right when the wind seemed the loudest, long nails gouged through my pants. I screamed as my flesh separated. Chapter 23. I'm going to get more comfortable. I got intense. Okay. Pain lanced through my leg. I reached down to clutch it. Holding it wasn't doing any good, but it felt better than doing nothing. A protective arm tightened around my midsection. The intimate contact made me aware that I was as naked as a kitty hawk, and so was the decidedly male body curled behind me. What the hell? Oh yeah, Anthony. I looked around. From all the blue sift pushed into the corners of the entryway we were in, it looked like we were at Anthony's place, and we were in a fuck ton of trouble. Not right now, but it was coming. Vampires knew we still existed. They would come for us. The thought scared me almost more than the vampire that had just barreled down on us had. Before I could give it more thought, a deep groan reminded me it had been way too long since I'd last had sex. The whole awareness changed at the sound. I had to get moving and stop thinking about the temptation behind me. Thinking didn't lead to good things. I could convince myself of anything. Sometimes what I was most afraid of was myself. I shrugged his arm off me. He moved it with obvious reluctance. I went to sit up, but my abs strained from the effort. My abused body didn't have the energy. I compromised by leveraging both hands into the packed dirt underneath me. From there, I was able to push myself. Push myself up. There it is. I missed that word. I was able to push myself up. The rough shape I was in shouldn't have come as a surprise after Anthony had pulled us through the spaces between like that. Not like he had a choice. Wielding this kind of magic came at a price. With a hand braced against the polished wooden walls for support, I made my way into the small house. All was quiet. The only sound was Anthony's wings brushing against the floor in the entryway as he got up. I made sure to stay in the center of the doorway. The polished walls curved into the floors, and I didn't want to slip on them. The architectural choice continued into the room, so I pushed off the wall. I could see myself sliding back down onto the floor and not getting up. On second thought, maybe that wasn't such a bad idea. I could sleep for a couple millennia. A plush rug stretched across the Spartan room. I didn't know what was better for a nap, the rug or the long couch that squatted in front of the simple fireplace. It took me a few seconds of standing in the doorway to notice that everything wasn't right with the room. A chair was overturned in front of a small table. On the table, a plate of food sat with the fork still half in a pile of potatoes. Why had he left in such a hurry? Anthony came up behind me and slipped his arms around me. The familiarity made my heart ache. Why couldn't this be enough? Why couldn't I feel like I had before? I wanted to fall back into his arms and take comfort there. I was shaken to my core by what had happened. It didn't seem fair that I had to push away the one person I could truly talk to. But I'd chosen Sven, so I did. I took Anthony's hands and broke their clasp, stepping out of the comfort of his embrace. I tried not to be rude about it. He had just risked his life to come and save me after all. He didn't follow me when I walked over to the hollowed-out log couch. It was covered in cushions, so it looked a lot more appealing than it sounded. I sank into the pillows. They felt so good, cradling my exhausted body. Only after I'd strategically placed a couple of the pillows over myself to cover the important parts did I give Anthony my full attention. It seemed like we were spending too much time together nude. Anthony, still back at the door, stretched out. I'm sure his body was just as sore like mine. I can't imagine he got used to that. He stayed in that splayed position with his hands behind his head and his back arched for so long, I couldn't help but be suspicious. There was no way he didn't know how good looking he was, especially looking like any wet girl's fantasy like that. His biceps bulged, and there was no missing how the muscles flexed from his abs to his thighs. Between his thighs was the most oppressive part of him. I didn't like that. I'd much rather him be flab and unimpressive, especially when my own love of my life was such a fluid status. Do you mind? I said, irritation clipping my words. A grin split his face from ear to ear. Do you? He was too adorable for words. I held the pillow in front of me farther up so he couldn't see I was smiling too. Gods knew he didn't need any encouragement. Get dressed, will you? Was all I said in response. He waggled his eyebrows at me, but headed to the bedroom door like I'd asked. I was grateful until I saw that perfect axe framed by his blue iridescent wings trailing to his calves. Thoughts I didn't want to think whispered in my head. I ignored them. Do I want to know why in the name of gods you were at a vampire bar? His voice asked, floating through the open door of his bedroom. Butterflies started attacking each other in the pit of my stomach. Shit, he did know. But he hadn't seen me until I was outside the bar. An awful thought crept into my brain. How did you know I was in the bar? I asked. My voice was deadly calm. He must have known how upset I was because he stalked out of the bedroom. He was clad only in a pair of jeans. The clothing choice struck me as odd for him, but I wasn't worried about his fashion sense. I was busy getting nice and pissed off. He walked to the couch with measured steps. Anger radiated from him as he stood towering over me. Just answer the question. That did it. My own anger cracked so fast, Sif spilled onto the wood floor beneath me before I even got a chance to throw it on the pillow. I sprang to my full height. I'd be damned if he was going to talk to me like that. I pushed his chest. My hands landed against his smooth skin. He didn't budge. It was even anger for noticing how smooth his skin was. Back off, Anthony, I said through my teeth. I fought not to raise my voice. You have some serious explaining to do. He laughed a mirthless laugh. Me? Me? I wasn't the one who just had to have my ass saved. He had a point, but that wasn't the issue here. I stood on the couch so he couldn't ignore me. Electric vibrated inside me. And just how did you know I was around vampires? How, Anthony? Are you paying those damn pixies to spy for you guys again? Did you learn nothing from last time? Anger and sadness ate at me. The fairy pixie war had been brutal. The height of the horror had been when they'd raided our house. My father, the king, had been their target. Horrors of them had swarmed in, brought him to the ground. They'd killed him and my sister that night while I watched from behind the dresser. Pixies could all die as far as I was concerned. You prance around the world of horror thinking you know everything, and you know nothing. Nothing, he screamed back. Cold rage hit me as spittle flew into my face. He brought up a shaking hand to wipe it off. His hand covered my cheek, and he wiped it off with a swipe of his thumb. It was a soothing action, and he took some of the rage with it. Cy, I do nothing but worry about you. I sit here in this, and he looked around the small space. Bitterness was clear in his voice as he said, room, and feel utterly helpless. Any number of things could be happening to you. If I can be there for you in any way, how can that be bad? Not pixies, Anthony. Anger laughed inside of me. I'd rather die. His face flamed in anger, and he slapped the edge of the couch. Forget about the damn pixies, he said, going back to shouting. I jumped down from the couch and marched to the door. There better not be any pixies, I warned, pointing at him and shaking. Forget about the pixies, he shouted after me as I slammed the door. I gotta see how many pages. Okay, we can do one more chapter. Wait, that's 56. Uh-oh. Okay, guys, should we do one more chapter or no? Yes, no, yes? What you think? I could eat pizza or I could read the last one. I'm going to go. I'm going to do one more. It's going to be more than 3 minutes, so it's going to go a little over. I hope that's okay. Okay. Yeah. Chapter 24. That's where we are. Okay. You got it, James. Chapter 24. What I thought was Anthony's home turned out to be Anthony's apartment. I stood in the middle of his hallway, naked as the day I was born. It had the same packed dirt of his entryway. Okay, so I hadn't thought this through that well. On second thought, I was probably better off being naked in a hallway rather than being outside. 2 women fairies huddled together at the end of the hallway, their sky blue and peony heads bobbing in excitement. More gossip, just what I needed. After I stared at them for a minute, they must have realized how rude they were being because they ushered each other down the hall, keeping an eye on me until they disappeared around the corner. Anger still boiled my blood, but it helped being away from Anthony. I didn't believe his claims about not using pixies. How else could he have known where I was? My mind flashed back to Thomas, his teeth extended and his hands reaching. He'd wanted me dead. I knew it the whole time he'd watched and followed me in Madame Violet's. All the talking was just cat and mouse games. He hadn't expected me to get away. If it hadn't been for Anthony, I probably wouldn't have. Now I had to deal with the ugly reality that they knew. Fear fed my anger. It grew as my brain spun the thought around like a mouse in a wheel. Vampires knew we existed. Anthony had wings. There wasn't any denying it. It would only be a matter of time before they came for us. They had time to scour the earth. It wasn't like we were invisible. Fairies came and went all the time. Hell, how many times had I been here alone? Anger gave way to fear. What could I do? I was only one person. Hell, what could any of us do? There was a reason vampires had hunted us to near extinction. A shiver of dread ran through me. I wrapped my arms around my naked body. The door to Anthony's apartment creaked open. In a second. Yeah, pizza. With the enormity of our impending deaths fresh in my mind, I couldn't find energy to be angry again. I looked at him. He still looked miffed. When he realized I was naked in the hallway, his irritation melted away. Instead, his eyebrow rose. A smile played at the corner of his mouth. So, you're just going to stand naked in the hallway then? I never took you for an exhibitionist. I wanted to banter with him, but the thought of vampires ate any happy feelings. When I didn't react, he sighed. I don't care if he thought I was being melodramatic. He had no idea the hell that was coming our way. Oblivious to my thoughts, he did his little hand flick thing and reached into the spaces between. His arm disappeared up to his elbow. After a few seconds, he dipped his head in, too. If I hadn't seen him do it a million times, I might have been weirded out by the fact that he looked like a headless amputee. Moments later, he pulled the bodice of a dress out. The length of it fell out in a puff. He tossed it to me. It was a beautiful bright magenta dress with sheer inserts throughout the sleeves and soft skirts. I stepped into it without a word. I reached around to zip it, but the pull was just out of my reach. It jingled as I fumbled for it. "Ah, for Dagda's sake," Anthony said. He took me by the shoulders and spun me around. I held my hair with as much grace as I could muster as he zipped it up with a huff. I tossed my thick hair behind me and turned around. "Thanks." His lips compressed and he shifted his shoulders with a humorless snort. Who would choose to walk up then? None other than my mother. This hour's dress was a green velvet number that was paired with a ruffled lace top and traditional standing collar, adding decorum to what would otherwise be racy, sleeveless, low-cut confection. Guilt reddened my skin. I could just be grateful Checked wasn't at her side for a change. Oh, and for the fact that I wasn't still naked as a jaybird. From her stillness, I could tell my presence surprised her. She wouldn't do anything as indelicate as stop in her tracks, though. Instead, she glided up to us like the queen she was. "What are you doing here?" she asked in her haughty voice that made me want to go home. "Am I not a fairy? Don't I have as much right to be here as anyone else?" I shot back. Don't be coy, Sybil." Though a smile twitched her lips, she said, "What are you doing in the royal suites?" Royal suites? The thought shocked me at first, but then I realized he was a messenger for the crown. At the raise of her eyebrows, I thought of what to say. I so didn't want to tell her about the vampires. Contact with vampires was strictly forbidden for obvious reasons. If she knew that not only had I sought one out, but I actually had feelings for him to boot, she would flip out. And my mother was not someone you wanted to see lose her shit. I knew the silence was stretching out too long, but I didn't know how to fill it. Relief and gratitude coursed through me when Anthony piped in. "She's here to get more information on Harold," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Of course I am," I agreed with a straight face. I was a terrible liar. The fewer words, the better. Her chin rose as she regarded the shirtless Anthony for the first time. Then her eyes swung to my dress with what might have been called a twinkle in her eye on anyone else before her eyes came back to me. "The dress suits you." She didn't believe us. I ground my teeth. She thought we were sleeping together. Since her assumption got me in a lot less trouble than the reality, I let it lie. She pivoted to walk away, but stopped. Not bothering to look at us, she said, "If you don't have to run off, the enchantet is soon." I didn't see her expression, but her voice was carefully apathetic. I didn't know what to make of her suggestion. Was she saying she wanted me to go? She didn't give me much time to think about it, though, because then she did leave. Not wanting her to know how badly I wanted to go, I waited for her to round the corner. I don't know why I bothered. She knew how much I loved the enchantet. Being surrounded by our history, our magic, alive around us, there was nothing like it. When I was sure she wasn't coming back, I shot a glance to the giant cuckoo clock at the end of the hall. Crystals danced around the ornate wooden scrolling, pointing to the fact that she was right. It was almost 2:00. Yearning pulled at me. I hadn't been to an enchantet in 5 years. I had so many things to do, though. Guilt brought my hand to tap my lips. Anthony watched indecision have its way with me. Finally, he said, "Just go." There were so many reasons not to. I didn't want my mother to think she had any influence on what I was doing. I had a case to solve. I had the love of my life to find. And I had to figure out a way to squash my species' impending doom. Anthony was right, though. I had to find a way to take time for things that made me happy. Life was too short for anything else. My feet danced. I was going to the enchantet. So that's the end of that chapter. It did run a little long. Yes, James, I'm getting pizza. I'm so excited. You know, it's funny. I put that part in here about lying and using as less information as possible when you're lying. It's funny because I taught that to the boys the other day. I was like, because we're playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I said, listen, if you're going to make a lie, you give as little information as possible. And Steve looked over and he's like, oh, that's a good lesson to teach him. I was like, oh, good call. Life lessons first, parenting second. You know what I'm saying? You know, just doing great parenting tips. Like, next thing I'm doing, I'm going to offer a parenting course. Thank you so much for coming to the reading today, you guys. I had a great time. I will be here again tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow again, because the abbreviated schedule, a little shifting around a bit because the holidays. So hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow. If not, catch us on the recast on YouTube. I don't know if that's the correct word, but you know what I mean. It'll be there. See you guys later. Bye.